The Korvathi Orbital Salvage Exchange smelled like burnt metal and cheap fuel, and Ethan Voss had learned a long time ago that the worse a place smelled, the better the deals were. He walked through the crowded auction hall with his hands in his jacket pockets, keeping his head low and his eyes open, the way any smart human learned to do when surrounded by aliens who stood 2 or 3 heads taller than him. Humans were still the new kids on the galactic block, and nobody out here took them seriously. Which was fine with Ethan, because being underestimated was the only advantage he had left. He was a salvage trader, a small one, the kind who bought broken ships for cheap, fixed them up with duct tape and stubbornness, and sold them for just enough profit to keep going another month. Today he was looking for a cargo hauler, something with a working engine and at least half its hull plate still attached, and he had exactly 12,000 galactic credits to his name, which was not a lot of money by any standard in any galaxy. The auction hall was a massive dome filled with holographic displays showing rotating images of the ships up for sale, and hundreds of alien buyers shuffled between the rows, muttering to each other in a dozen different languages. Ethan recognized most of the species here. The tall, gray-skinned Torvan with their 6 cold eyes, the squat armored Dravosi who ran the station, the slender insectoid Keth who always bid in groups, and a few rare ones he could not name. The auctioneer was a Dravosi with a booming voice that echoed off the dome walls, and he moved through the lots quickly, rattling off descriptions and prices while buyers raised their bid paddles or tapped their wrist terminals. Lot after lot sold. Warships went to military contractors, haulers went to shipping companies, and a few sad little shuttles went to independent operators like Ethan, who were just trying to survive. Auctioneer reached lot 7749. The holographic display flickered and showed a ship that made Ethan stop walking. It was roughly 400 meters long, asymmetrical in a way that no modern shipbuilder would design, with strange hull plating that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of the light. The listing read, "Unidentified derelict, species of origin unknown, structural integrity compromised, power systems non-functional, sold as is for salvage material only." The auctioneer's voice changed when he read the description, getting faster, almost nervous, like he wanted to get past this one as quickly as possible. Ethan looked around the hall and noticed something strange. Nobody was bidding. More than that, the aliens around him were actively looking away from the display, some of them shifting uncomfortably, others whispering to their companions with what Ethan had learned to recognize as fear. A Torvan official in a military uniform stared at the hologram with all 6 of his eyes narrowed, his jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back so hard that his gray knuckles had turned white. The auctioneer called for an opening bid, and the hall went silent. Ethan felt something then, not a sound exactly, more like a pull, a quiet tug somewhere behind his ribs, that told him to pay attention. And he had survived long enough in this business to know that when every smart person in a room was running from something, it either meant genuine danger or genuine opportunity. He raised his bid paddle. 12,000 credits, he said, and his voice sounded very small in that enormous silent room. The auctioneer blinked all 4 of his eyes at the same time, hesitated for half a second, then slammed his gavel down so fast it cracked the podium. "Sold to the human." The words echoed through the dome, and Ethan felt every alien eye in the building turn toward him, some confused, some amused, with an expression he could not read at all. He had barely lowered his paddle when a tall figure appeared at his side. It was the Torvan official, up close, even more imposing than from a distance, nearly 7 feet tall, with pale gray skin, and 6 eyes, arranged in 2 vertical rows, on a face that held no warmth whatsoever. "Human," the Torvan said, in a voice that was perfectly calm and perfectly cold. "I am Overseer Draneth of the Torvan hegemony, and I would like to make you an offer." "I just bought a ship," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You bought a wreck," Draneth corrected. "I am offering you 500,000 galactic credits for it, right now. No paperwork, no delays. The funds transferred to your account before you leave this hall." 500,000 credits. Ethan felt his mouth go dry, because that was more money than he had made in his entire career combined. More than enough to buy a proper ship, with working systems, and clean quarters, and an engine that did not sound like it was dying every time he turned it on. He almost said yes. The word was right there on his tongue, ready to come out, but something stopped him. It was the look in those 6 alien eyes. Not greed, not casual interest, but something deeper and more desperate, something that looked almost like fear. Nobody offers 500,000 credits for a wreck they think is worthless. "I appreciate the offer," Ethan said slowly, "but I think I will hold on to my purchase for now." Something moved behind Draneth's eyes, something dark and sharp, but his expression did not change. "That would be unwise," the overseer said quietly, then turned and walked away without another word. Ethan stood there for a moment, with his heart hammering in his chest, wondering if he had just made the best decision of his life, or the worst one. He was heading toward the exit, when a small hand touched his elbow. He looked down and saw a tiny alien, barely 4 feet tall, with silvery skin covered in fine wrinkles, and enormous dark eyes that held a depth of years Ethan could not even begin to count. She was a Quillari, one of the oldest species in the galaxy, and she wore the simple robes of an archivist. "Human," she whispered, her voice thin and ancient, "do you know what you just bought?" "A ship," Ethan said. The old alien shook her head slowly. "That is not a ship," she said. "That is a legend." She said nothing more and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ethan standing alone, with a receipt for 12,000 credits, and a feeling in his gut that his life had just changed forever. An hour later, he stood in the docking bay, looking up at the hull of Lot 7749 in person for the first time. It was bigger than the hologram had suggested, and stranger too. The hull plating was dark, but seemed to hold light within it. Metal that had swallowed stars and never let them go. He walked up the boarding ramp, his boots echoing on a surface that felt more like stone than steel. And the moment he stepped across the threshold, something happened that should not have been possible. The lights came on. Not flickering, not stuttering, not the weak glow of failing emergency power, but a full, warm illumination that spread from where he stood and rippled outward through the corridors like a wave, like the ship had been holding its breath for a very long time, and had finally decided to exhale. Deep within the vessel, something hummed, a resonance that Ethan felt not in his ears, but in his bones. A sound that was old and vast and somehow welcoming. He followed the lights forward, through corridors that curved in ways that should not have made sense, but somehow did, until he reached what could only be the bridge. And there, on the far wall, a holographic sigil blazed to life in blue-white. Light, an emblem of sweeping geometric lines that intersected and folded in patterns no living species used. Ethan did not recognize it, but somehow, somewhere deep in the part of his brain that understood things before his mind caught up, he knew it was important. He did not yet know that this symbol belonged to the Vithari, a civilization that had vanished over 100,000 years ago, a people so ancient that most species considered them nothing more than a myth. He did not yet know that he was standing on the bridge of one of the most powerful warships ever constructed. All he knew was that he had paid 12,000 credits for a ship that the entire galaxy was afraid of, and it had just woken up for him. Ethan Voss had been inside a lot of ships in his life, broken ones and beaten ones, and ones that smelled so bad he had to wear a breathing mask just to walk through the cargo hold. But he had never been inside anything like this. The corridors of Lot 7749 stretched out around him in smooth, curving lines that felt less like engineering and more like something that had grown naturally, like the inside of a vast seashell made of dark metal and quiet light. Every step he took triggered another response from the ship, panels illuminating ahead of him and dimming behind, air circulation systems sighing to life with a soft whisper, temperature adjusting around his body until it felt exactly comfortable, in a way he could not quite explain. It was as if the ship was watching him and making itself ready. He explored for over an hour, moving through chambers and passageways that revealed themselves one after another, and the deeper he went, the more certain he became of something that did not make sense. The ship was bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. Not by a little, by a lot. And Ethan was not a physicist, but he knew enough about space and dimensions to understand that this should not be possible. And yet, here he was, walking through his fourth consecutive corridor in a direction that should have taken him outside the hull 10 minutes ago. He found what looked like crew quarters that could house hundreds, a medical bay filled with equipment he could not identify, storage areas that were empty but enormous, and engineering sections where machines the size of houses sat dormant behind shimmering barriers of faint blue energy. Everything was intact. For a ship that had been listed as structural integrity compromised, there was not a scratch anywhere, not a dent, not a crack, not a single sign of the damage or decay that should have accumulated over what he was beginning to suspect was a very, very long time. He finally reached the bridge again, and stood in the center of it, looking up at the glowing sigil on the wall. And that was when the voice spoke. "You are the first to walk these corridors in 107,412 standard years." Ethan jumped so hard he nearly fell over. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, deep and smooth with a quality that was not quite male and not quite female, but something in between, something that carried the weight of ages in every syllable. "What said that?" Ethan managed, his hand reaching for the small plasma cutter on his belt, which was the closest thing to a weapon he owned. "I am Kalen," the voice said. "I am the warden intelligence of this vessel, and I must say it is deeply peculiar to be awake again." A holographic figure shimmered into existence in front of Ethan, tall and slender, with features that were almost human but not quite, with skin like polished bronze, eyes that glowed with the same blue-white light as the sigil on the wall. "You are an AI," Ethan said. "I am something rather more than that," Kalen replied, with a tone that carried just the faintest trace of amusement. "But for the sake of simplicity, yes. I am the ship's intelligence, its memory, its voice, and its conscience, and I have been waiting a very long time for someone to walk through that door." "Why me?" Ethan asked, because it was the only question that mattered. "Because you are human," Kalen said, as if that explained everything. When Ethan stared at him blankly, Kalen's holographic form tilted its head slightly and continued. "This vessel was built by the Vathari, a civilization that existed long before any species currently alive in this galaxy had learned to use fire. And the Vathari did not build simple ships. They built living instruments, vessels that were designed to form a neural bond with a compatible operator." "Compatible," Ethan repeated. "The bonding requires a very specific set of neurological patterns and genetic markers," Kalen explained. "And in the 100,000 years that this ship has drifted through your galaxy, passing through the hands of dozens of species, not a single one has been able to activate so much as a door panel." Kalen paused, and his glowing eyes fixed on Ethan with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Until you walked aboard, and the entire ship woke up like it had been struck by lightning, which I must admit was quite an experience from my perspective as well." "So humans are compatible," Ethan said slowly. "Humans are compatible," Kalen confirmed, "and as far as I can determine, humans are the only currently living species in this galaxy that are, which makes you rather more important than you probably feel right now. Ethan let out a long breath and sat down on what he hoped was a chair. "Exactly is this ship?" he asked. "Her name is Aethra's Vigil," Kalen said, and something in his voice changed when he spoke the name, becoming softer and more reverent. "She is a Myth-class command vessel, one of only 12 ever constructed, the finest achievement of Vethari engineering, designed not for conquest, but for guardianship." "Myth-class," Ethan said. "That sounds made up." "Everything sounds made up until you are sitting inside it," Kalen replied dryly. Over the next several hours, Kalen walked Ethan through the basics of what he now owned. And with every new piece of information, Ethan's sense of reality shifted a little further. The ship's hull was made of an adaptive alloy that could repair itself and reconfigure its molecular structure in response to damage. The engines operated on principles that Kalen admitted he could not fully explain in terms Ethan would understand, but which essentially folded space rather than moving through it. Shields did not just block energy weapons, but learned from them and adapted in real time. And the weapon systems were extensive enough that Kalen suggested they save that conversation for later, when Ethan had had something to eat and perhaps a stiff drink. "Current operational capacity is at 4.7%, Kalen reported. "Most systems remain in deep dormancy and will require sustained interaction with a bonded operator to fully reactivate." 4.7%, Ethan said, "and it's still lit up like a festival when I walked in." "Yes," Kalen said, "which should give you some idea of what 100% looks like." Meanwhile, outside the ship, the galaxy was already reacting to what Ethan had done. News traveled fast on a station like the Korvathi Exchange, and by the time Ethan had finished his first conversation with Kalen, half the station knew that the human salvage trader had activated the derelict that nobody else could. The Torvan hegemony moved fast. Within 6 hours of the auction, Overseer Draneth filed a formal petition with the Korvathi Salvage Authority, demanding that the sale of Lot 7749 be annulled on the grounds that the vessel constituted a hazardous and unstable relic that posed a threat to station safety and regional security. The petition called for the immediate seizure and controlled disassembly of the ship. Ethan read the notice on his comm terminal and felt cold settle into his stomach, because he understood exactly what was happening. This was not about safety. The Torvan had been trying to crack Vethari technology for centuries. Now that a human had accidentally proven the technology still worked, they wanted to tear the ship apart and take everything they could learn from its corpse. "They want to scrap you," Ethan said aloud. "They have wanted to scrap me for 200 years, Kalen replied calmly. "I have been through 4 auctions on this station alone, and each time the Torvan have maneuvered to acquire me through various means, but they could never justify the expense of buying a ship they could not activate. And now I activated it for them." "Now you activated it for them," Kalen agreed, "and they are very motivated." The hearing was set for 72 hours from now, and Ethan sat on the bridge of the most advanced warship in the galaxy, with no money, no lawyer, and no idea what he was going to do. "Kalen," he said quietly, "how powerful is this ship exactly?" Kalen was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been pride. "At full operational capacity, the Aethra's Vigil could engage and defeat the combined fleets of every spacefaring nation currently in existence," he said, "simultaneously." Another pause. "At 4.7%, we could merely embarrass them." The ship's status: a vast web of systems mostly dark, but with small clusters of light, spreading slowly outward like stars being born. "I paid 12,000 credits for this," he whispered. "Yes," Kalen said, and for the first time there was warmth in his ancient voice. "I believe you got quite the deal." The Korvathi Arbitration Hall was built to intimidate. and it was doing an excellent job. It was a vast circular chamber carved into the heart of the station, with rising tiers of seats filled with representatives from dozens of species, all looking down at a central floor where the parties in dispute were meant to stand and make their case. The ceiling was a dome of transparent alloy that showed the stars outside, a constant reminder that out here in the void, law was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. Ethan Voss stood on that central floor in the same jacket he had worn to the auction 3 days ago, because it was the only jacket he owned, and he looked up at the assembled faces of the galactic legal establishment and felt very small. Across from him stood Overseer Draneth of the Torvan Hegemony, flanked by a team of 6 legal advisors, each one dressed in immaculate gray uniforms, each one carrying datapads, loaded with what Ethan assumed were thousands of pages of arguments and precedents and technical reports designed to bury him. Draneth himself looked exactly as calm and cold as he had at the auction, his 6 eyes fixed on Ethan with the patient contempt of someone who had already decided how this was going to end. The arbitration panel sat on an elevated platform above them. 5 judges from 5 different species, chosen for their supposed neutrality, though Ethan noticed that at least 2 of them kept glancing at the Torvan delegation with something that looked a lot like deference. The head judge was a massive Korvathi with deep-set eyes and a voice like grinding stone, who called the hearing to order and invited the petitioner to speak first. Draneth rose and addressed the panel with the smooth confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. He spoke about safety, about the unknown dangers of pre-galactic technology, about the catastrophic risk of an unstable power core sitting in the heart of a populated station, about the responsibility of civilized species to prevent dangerous relics from falling into the hands of those who could not understand or control them. He did not say humans when he said that last part, but he did not need to. His legal team presented technical reports, expert testimony from Torvan scientists, historical records of Vethari-era artifacts causing damage when improperly handled, and a formal risk assessment that concluded the ship should be seized and dismantled under emergency safety protocols immediately. It was thorough, it was professional, and it was convincing, and Ethan could see the judges nodding along as Draneth spoke. When it was Ethan's turn to respond, the hall went noticeably quieter, not with attention, but with the kind of polite discomfort that people showed when they knew they were about to watch something embarrassing. Ethan had no legal team, no datapads full of precedents, no expert witnesses lined up, and no formal training in galactic law. What he had was 3 days of preparation, a ship AI with access to a very large archive, and the particular kind of stubbornness that humans were not yet famous for, but probably should have been. He walked to the center of the floor and spoke in a clear voice that did not shake even though his hands wanted to. "I would like to ask the Overseer a simple question," Ethan said, looking directly at Draneth. "If this ship is so dangerous, if it poses such a terrible risk to this station and everyone on it, then why is today the first time the Torvan hegemony has ever said so?" He paused and then pulled up a holographic display from his wrist terminal, data that Kalen had helped him find in the station's own public records. "This ship has been housed at the Korvathi Exchange for 214 years, Ethan continued. "It has been listed in 4 separate auctions during that time. In 7812, in 7856, in 7901, and in the current year. And I have here the complete public record of every safety petition, every hazard report, and every formal complaint filed regarding this vessel during those 214 years. He let the holographic display hang in the air where everyone could see it. "The number is 0, he said. "In over 2 centuries, not a single species, not a single government, not a single safety inspector, and most importantly not the Torvan hegemony, ever filed a single document claiming this ship was dangerous. The hall was quiet now, a different kind of quiet. The Torvan hegemony has had 200 years to raise safety concerns about this vessel, Ethan said. They raised none. Their sudden concern for public safety appeared exactly 72 hours ago, which happens to be exactly the moment a human activated systems that no Torvan scientist has ever been able to turn on. Judges, this is not a safety petition, he said. This is an attempt to seize technology through legal manipulation, because the hegemony could not acquire it any other way. They could not buy it because they could not justify the cost of a dead ship. They could not steal it because it was held in a secured facility, and they could not use it because it would not respond to them. So now they want to have it torn apart so they can study its pieces. And they are using this panel to do it. The murmuring in the hall grew louder, and Ethan could see that some of the judges had stopped looking at the Torvan delegation with deference and started looking at them with questions. Dranith's expression did not change, but one of his legal advisors leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear. Then something happened that Ethan had not expected. A voice rose from the upper tiers of the hall, thin and ancient, and carrying an authority that had nothing to do with volume. I wish to testify. The hall turned and looked up at a tiny figure making her way down the steps with slow, careful dignity. It was Elder Savathi, the Quillari archivist who had whispered to Ethan at the auction. The head judge looked uncertain, but Quillari elders held a special status in galactic law, as recognized keepers of historical record, and denying her the right to speak would have been a political disaster that no judge wanted to touch. Savathi reached the central floor and stood beside Ethan, barely reaching his chest, and addressed the panel in a voice that was quiet but carried to every corner of the dome. She spoke about the Vethari. She told the panel that the Vethari were not a myth, but a real civilization that had existed over 100,000 years ago, that their technology was not random or dangerous, but designed with profound intentionality, that the myth-class vessels were the crowning achievement of that civilization, and that they were built with a specific and sacred purpose. The myth-class ships were designed to choose, Savathi said. They were engineered to form a bond with a compatible species, a bond that was considered by the Vethari to be inviolable. The ship chose this human, and in the traditions of the civilization that built it, that bond is sacred. She turned to the judges with her enormous dark eyes, and spoke with the weight of someone who had spent her entire long life studying this exact subject. To dismantle a myth-class vessel that has bonded with its operator would be the equivalent of desecrating a holy relic older than every civilization in this room combined, she said. I am telling you this not as opinion, but as historical fact. And I am telling you that if this panel authorizes that desecration, the Quillari archive will record it as such, permanently. That was a threat, wrapped in the gentlest possible language, because the Quillari archive was the most respected historical record in the galaxy, and no government wanted to be remembered in it as the one that destroyed the last functioning relic of the Vethari. The judges deliberated for less than an hour. The ruling was a compromise, which meant nobody was happy. The sale stood. Ethan was confirmed as the legal owner, but the panel imposed a condition. He had 30 standard days to demonstrate that the ship was operationally stable and posed no safety risk to the surrounding region. And if he failed to do so, the vessel would be seized for disassembly. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat either. It was a clock. Ethan accepted the ruling and turned to leave, and he was halfway to the exit when Dranith appeared beside him. The overseer matched his pace and spoke in a voice so quiet that no one else could hear. You performed well in there, human, Dranith said. You are smarter than I expected, which changes nothing. Walking, and Ethan stopped with him. The hegemony does not lose to vermin, Dranith said, his 6 eyes cold and steady. You have your 30 days. I suggest you enjoy them, because when they are over, and you have failed to meet the panel's requirements, and you will fail, that ship will be in my hands, and there is nothing in this galaxy that will stop that." Ethan looked up at the towering alien and felt fear, real deep fear, the kind that lived in the stomach and whispered that maybe he should have taken the 500,000 credits when he had the chance. But he also felt something else, something stubborn and hot, that rose up through the fear like a flame through dark water. 30 days is a long time, Ethan said quietly. A lot can happen. He walked away before Dranith could respond, and he did not look back. He reached the ship 20 minutes later and stepped onto the bridge, where Kalen's holographic form was waiting with an expression that managed to convey deep concern without technically having a face designed for it. "How much of that did you hear?" Ethan asked. "All of it," Kalen said, "including the part in the hallway. I have sensors throughout the station." "Then you know we have 30 days. "We have considerably less than 30 days, Kalen said, and his voice was grave. "While you were in the hearing, I intercepted and decrypted a series of communications between Overseer Dranith and a Torvon military intelligence unit operating in this sector. A holographic display appeared, showing streams of encrypted data that Kalen had broken open like eggshells. "They are assembling a covert strike team," Kalen said. "Their orders are to infiltrate the station and create what the communications describe as a demonstrable safety incident aboard this vessel. In other words, they intend to sabotage the ship's reactor to simulate a meltdown, which would give the Korvathi authority justification to order emergency seizure before the 30 days expire." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "When?" he asked. "Based on the deployment timeline in these communications," Kalen said, "we have approximately 6 days. Ethan sat down heavily in the command chair and stared at the stars through the bridge viewport. 6 days, no money, no allies, no weapons he knew how to use, and the most powerful military government in the sector quietly preparing to destroy everything he had. "Kalen," he said, "I think we need to start working faster." "I think that is a significant understatement," Kalen replied. Ethan Voss had 6 days to prepare for a sabotage attack by one of the most advanced military powers in the galaxy. And he started by admitting something important to himself. He could not do this alone. It was not easy for him to accept, because he had been alone for most of his adult life, running a one-man salvage operation, sleeping in rented cargo bays, eating cheap station food, trusting nobody because nobody had ever given him a reason to. But Kalen had laid out the situation with his usual calm precision, and the math was simple. The ship needed to come online faster. Ethan could not operate Vethari systems and repair standard mechanical components and monitor station activity and sleep at the same time. And if the Torvon sabotage team succeeded, then nothing else would matter. So Ethan did something he almost never did. He asked for help. The first person who answered was someone he did not expect. Her name was Ressa, mechanic who worked on the lower levels of the salvage exchange, and she showed up at the Vigil's boarding ramp on day 2 with a toolkit slung over her shoulder and a look on her face that said she had absolutely nothing to lose. "I heard what you did at the hearing," she said. "I also heard the Torvon filed a complaint with my supervisor and got me put on suspension for talking to a journalist about Vethari alloy composition, so I figure I might as well come work on the actual thing, since they already punished me for it." She was short for a Dravosi, barely taller than Ethan, with the thick armored skin of her species, and 4 dexterous hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had been taking machines apart since childhood. Kalen scanned her the moment she stepped aboard, and reported that while she could not interface with the Vethari bonding systems, she was more than capable of handling the ship's secondary mechanical infrastructure. And within hours, she was deep in the engineering section, making sounds of amazement that echoed through the corridors. The second person arrived on day 3. Joran Hale was human, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair, and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in a uniform. And he walked up the boarding ramp like he was reporting for duty. He had been an officer in the Earth's Stellar Navy, discharged 2 years ago under circumstances he did not explain, and he had seen the footage of the auction and the hearing on the Galactic Net. "I came because a human is standing alone against the Torvan hegemony, with nothing but a shit he cannot fly and a stubbornness problem," Joran said, and that seemed like exactly the kind of situation that needed another human in it. He had combat experience, tactical training, and an understanding of military operations that Ethan did not, and Kalen immediately began briefing him on the ship's defensive capabilities. The third member of their crew was already aboard. Elder Savathi had quietly moved into one of the crew quarters after the hearing, and had been studying the ship's partially accessible historical archives with a devotion that bordered on obsession. Her enormous dark eyes reflecting the glow of Vithari data crystals, as she carefully translated fragments of a language that no living being had spoken in 100 millennia. "I have waited my entire life to see the inside of a Vithari vessel," she told Ethan, when he found her surrounded by holographic texts. "I am not leaving." With his small and unlikely crew assembled, Ethan threw himself into the work of bringing the Aethra's vigil to life. The process was unlike anything he had experienced, because Vithari technology did not respond to buttons or commands or code. It responded to the bond between ship and operator, and that bond was neurological. Kalen guided Ethan through activation protocols that involved sitting in the command chair and essentially thinking at the ship, opening neural pathways that allowed his human brain to communicate with systems designed 100,000 years ago for a species that had since left the physical universe entirely. It was exhausting. After each session, Ethan would emerge drenched in sweat, with a headache that felt like his skull was being used as a drum. But each time he went deeper, the ship responded more, systems lighting up across the diagnostic display like a constellation forming in real time. By day 4, the ship was at 8% operational capacity. By day 5, it was at 10, and Ethan could feel the vigil in a way that was difficult to describe. Not like a machine he was operating, but like a presence he was becoming aware of, vast and patient and quietly powerful. On the night of day 5, Kalen woke Ethan from a dead sleep with 2 words: "They are here." Ethan was on the bridge in 90 seconds, still pulling on his boots, and Joran was right behind him with his jaw set and his eyes hard. Kalen displayed the sensor data on the main screen. 3 figures in maintenance uniforms moving through the lower service tunnels of the station toward the Vigil's docking berth, carrying equipment that Kalen identified as a modified radiation pulse device designed to trigger a cascading reaction in the ship's dormant reactor. If that device activates inside the reactor chamber, it will create a radiation spike consistent with a core meltdown, Kalen explained. The station's automated safety systems will register it as a genuine emergency, and the Korvathi Authority will have legal grounds to order immediate seizure. "Can you stop them from getting aboard?" Ethan asked. "They are not attempting to board," Kalen said. "The device is designed to be attached externally to the reactor housing through the maintenance access port on the station side of the docking berth. They do not need to set foot on the ship." Ethan felt his blood go cold, because that meant the sabotage could happen without ever triggering the ship's internal defenses. He had seconds to think, and in those seconds something happened. He felt the vigil. Not heard, not saw, felt. A vast calm intelligence pressing against his awareness, like a hand on his shoulder. And in that contact was a wordless suggestion, not a command, but an offer. "The engines." "Kalen," Ethan said, and his voice was steady in a way that surprised him. "How fast can we launch?" "The engines are at sufficient capacity for emergency departure," Kalen said. "However, we are locked in docking clamps rated for heavy cruisers, and departure without station clearance would be considered." How fast? Ethan repeated. 11 seconds, Kalen said. Do it. What happened next was felt by every living being on the Korvathi exchange. Vigil lit up like a star being born, her engines activating with a harmonic roar that vibrated through the station's superstructure and rattled every deck plate within half a kilometer. The docking clamps that held her in place groaned and then shattered like they were made of glass, and the ship surged forward out of the berth with a burst of acceleration that sent a shockwave rippling through the station's external framework. Behind them, in the empty berth, the Torvon sabotage device detonated uselessly in vacuum, a brief flash of radiation that dissipated into nothing. Inside the ship, Ressa was thrown against a wall and came up cursing in 3 languages. Savathi gripped her chair with both hands and held on with surprising strength for someone her age. And Joran braced himself against the tactical console with a fierce grin spreading across his face. They were free of the station and moving into open space, and the stars were everywhere. But freedom lasted exactly 4 minutes before the sensors lit up with new contacts. 5 Torvon heavy cruisers dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that blocked every exit vector, each one 50 times the mass of a standard warship, bristling with weapons designed to crack planetary defenses. The Hegemony Patrol Squadron, Kalen announced. They are hailing us and demanding immediate surrender of the vessel on grounds of illegal departure and suspected theft. Theft, Ethan said. I own this ship. They are not interested in legal accuracy at this point, Kalen replied. The cruisers opened fire. The first volley was a wall of plasma and kinetic rounds that would have vaporized any normal vessel, and Ethan watched it coming on the display with a feeling that should have been terror but was instead something quieter and more focused. The Vigil's shields activated. They did not simply block the incoming fire, they shimmered into existence, like a living membrane of light that analyzed each incoming projectile and energy beam in real time and adapted its resonance to neutralize them with mathematical precision. Plasma bolts diffused into harmless light. Kinetic rounds slowed and stopped and floated motionless before dissolving, and the ship did not even shudder. Shields holding, Kalen said. They will not hold indefinitely at our current power level. Shall I activate weapons? Yes, Ethan said, and then added, nobody dies. Kalen paused for exactly 1 second. Understood, he said, and something in his voice sounded almost proud. The Aethra's Vigil turned toward 5 heavy cruisers, and what happened next became the most viewed footage on the galactic net for the next standard year. The ship moved like nothing the Torvon had ever encountered, not with the lumbering momentum of a capital ship, but with a fluid, organic grace that made their targeting computers stutter and fail. Weapons fired with a precision so exact that it bordered on surgical art. Each cruiser was struck in sequence, not in their reactors or crew sections or life support, but in the specific junction points where weapons connected to power, where engines connected to fuel, where communication arrays connected to transmitters. In 3 minutes and 47 seconds, all 5 Torvon heavy cruisers were drifting dead in space, completely disabled, utterly helpless, without a single casualty on any vessel. A Korvathi trade convoy that happened to be passing through the sector recorded the entire engagement from 3 different angles. And before the last Torvon cruiser had stopped spinning, the footage was already being uploaded to every major network in the galaxy. A ship bought for 12,000 credits by a human salvage trader had just dismantled a Torvon battle squadron the way a teacher might gently take a dangerous toy from a child. Command Chair, with his hands trembling and his heart pounding, and stared at the 5 silent warships floating in the void. Kalen, he said quietly. Yes, Ethan. What is our operational capacity now? 14.3%, Kalen said. It is increasing faster. The bond is strengthening. A pause, and when Kalen spoke again, his voice carried something that 100,000 years of silence had not managed to extinguish. "Ethan Voss, I have waited 100,000 years for an operator, and I want you to know that I believe the wait was worthwhile." Ethan closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since the auction. And somewhere deep in the ship, the vigil hummed around him, warm and vast, and awake and alive. And for the first time since this had all started, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The galaxy had not stopped talking in 3 days, and it did not seem like it was going to stop anytime soon. The footage of the battle, if it could even be called a battle when one side never stood a chance, had been viewed over 9 billion times across every major galactic network, translated into 400 languages, analyzed frame by military experts from every spacefaring species, and discussed in every bar and boardroom and government chamber from the core worlds to the outer rim. A lone human in a junk ship had disabled 5 Torvan heavy cruisers in under 4 minutes without killing a single soul, and the galaxy did not know what to do with that information. Some species were fascinated, some were terrified, some were both at the same time, and the humans back on Earth were mostly confused, because until 3 days ago, almost none of them had heard of Ethan Voss, or the Vethari, or the Aethra's Vigil. Crisis. The sabotage operation had been exposed within hours of the battle. Independent investigators from the Korvathi Authority reviewed the station's security recordings and found clear footage of 3 Torvan operatives in disguise, moving through restricted maintenance tunnels, carrying equipment that matched the radiation pulse device that detonated in the empty docking berth. The evidence was irrefutable, and the political fallout was immediate. Overseer Dranith was publicly recalled from the Korvathi sector in what the Torvan government described as a routine reassignment, but what everyone in the galaxy understood was a humiliation so complete that his career was effectively over. The hegemony issued a formal statement expressing regret over what they called an unauthorized action by rogue elements within their intelligence division, a claim that absolutely nobody believed, but which served as the diplomatic fiction necessary for the situation to be resolved, without escalating into something worse. More importantly, the Torvan formally withdrew their petition against the Aethra's Vigil. It was over. The Korvathi arbitration panel convened an emergency session on the 4th day. The same 5 judges in the same domed chamber, but the atmosphere was completely different from the first hearing. There were no Torvan lawyers this time, no stacks of fabricated safety reports, no carefully constructed arguments about public danger. There was only the undeniable reality that a ship listed as a non-functional derelict had proven itself to be the most capable vessel anyone had ever seen, and it had done so while showing more restraint and precision than any military fleet in recorded history. The head judge read the ruling in a voice that carried a weight of significance that even he seemed to feel. The sale was confirmed, fully and permanently. Ethan Voss was recognized as the legal owner and bonded operator of the vessel designated Aethra's Vigil, with full sovereign vessel rights under galactic maritime law, and the 30-day stability review was declared satisfied on the grounds that a ship capable of surgically disabling 5 warships without a single casualty was by definition under stable operational control. Ethan stood on the central floor of the arbitration hall and heard the ruling and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt like he belonged somewhere. Outside the hearing, the political landscape was shifting in ways that Ethan was only beginning to understand. Representatives from species and governments that had never given humanity a second glance were suddenly very interested in making contact, not with threats or demands, but with offers. The Dravosi Confederation proposed a trade agreement that would give human merchants preferential docking rates at every Dravosi station in the sector. The Quillari Archive formally invited Earth to contribute to their historical records for the first time. The Keth Collective sent a diplomatic envoy to discuss technology exchange programs. And even some of the smaller independent species that had been quietly pushed around by the Torvon for centuries began reaching out to see if perhaps an alliance with the humans might be worth exploring. One human's stubbornness had done more for Earth's standing in the galaxy than 50 years of careful diplomacy, and the diplomats back home were not sure whether to be grateful or annoyed. Aboard the Vigil, life had settled into something that almost resembled routine. Ressa spent her days in the engineering section, singing Dravosi work songs while their four hands moved in a blur across Vathari machinery that she was learning to understand with a speed that impressed even Kalen. Joran had taken to the tactical station like he was born for it, running simulations and studying the ship's defensive capabilities. Methodical intensity of a career military officer who had finally found a mission worthy of his skills. And Elder Savathi had made the most important discovery of all. She found it on the 6th day after the battle, buried deep in the ship's historical archives, behind layers of encryption that Kalen had been slowly unlocking as the ship's power increased. It was a message recorded in the Vathari language over 100,000 years ago. And when Savathi translated it and played it on the bridge, the room went completely silent. The message was from the Vathari themselves, not a warning or a log entry, but a farewell. It explained that the Vathari had not been destroyed. They had not died out or been conquered or fallen to some catastrophe. They had evolved. They had reached a point in their development where physical existence was no longer necessary or desirable, and they had chosen to transcend, to move beyond the material universe into a higher dimensional state of being that the message described in terms that no translation could fully capture. But before they left, they had done something extraordinary. They had built 12 ships, the Myth-class vessels, and they had seeded them across the galaxy like messages in bottles cast into an infinite ocean. Each one carrying a fragment of Vathari knowledge, each one designed to sleep for as long as necessary until a worthy species found it. The ships were not weapons, they were gifts. They were meant to be inherited by those who came after, by young civilizations reaching out into the stars for the first time, stumbling and struggling and making mistakes the way all young things do. And the Vathari had wanted to leave something behind that would help them, guide them, protect them during the vulnerable early years of their journey into the wider universe. The ships were designed to choose their inheritors carefully, to bond only with species that met specific criteria, not of strength or intelligence or technological achievement, but of character. The Vathari had searched for qualities that they believed defined true worthiness: adaptability in the face of the unknown, courage without cruelty, the ability to wield overwhelming power and choose restraint, and a stubborn, persistent refusal to give up, even when the odds were impossible. Savathi finished reading the translation and looked up at Ethan, with tears running down her ancient silver face. "They left these ships for someone like you," she said. "They waited 100,000 years for someone who would buy a wreck at an auction just because the silence in the room felt wrong, who would turn down 500,000 credits because the desperation in an alien's eyes did not make sense, who would stand alone in front of a galactic tribunal and refuse to back down, and who would disable 5 warships and choose not to kill a single being aboard them." Her eyes with a trembling hand. "The Vathari were looking for humanity," she said. "They just did not know your name yet." Kalen confirmed what the archives revealed. There were 11 other Myth-class ships still out there, dormant, scattered across the galaxy, in forgotten corners and abandoned stations, and drifting through the void in patient silence, waiting for the species that would wake them up. 11 ships, each one as powerful as the Vigil, each one carrying knowledge and technology that could reshape civilization, each one waiting for a human to walk aboard and say hello. Ethan stood on the bridge and let that sink in. Around him the ship hummed with quiet power, systems continuing to awaken as the bond between human and vessel deepened with every passing hour. The diagnostic display now showing nearly 20% operational capacity and climbing steadily. Through the viewport the stars stretched out in every direction than any human could count in a lifetime, and somewhere among them 11 ancient ships were sleeping. Ressa was in the engineering section, arguing loudly with the diagnostic panel that she insisted was giving her incorrect readings, her 4 hands gesturing emphatically at machinery older than her entire species. Joran was at the tactical station running combat simulations against increasingly absurd odds, and occasionally muttering things like, "That should not be possible," and "the shields did what now?" PPP. Savathi was back in the archives, deeper than she had ever been, following threads of Vethari history that branched and connected in patterns that made her gasp with wonder every few minutes. And Kalen, ancient and vast and no longer alone, watched over all of them with a warmth that 100,000 years of darkness had never managed to extinguish. Ethan sat in the command chair and felt the ship around him like a second heartbeat. Decision. He opened a long-range communication channel, aimed it at Earth, and spoke. "This is Ethan Voss, captain of the Aethras Vigil, calling anyone on Earth who is listening, and I really hope someone is listening because I have a lot to tell you." He paused, and took a breath, and smiled. "Humanity, we have been out here thinking we were small, thinking we were behind, thinking we were the new kids who nobody took seriously. And I am calling to tell you that a civilization 100,000 years old looked across time and space at every species in this galaxy and decided that we were the ones worth waiting for." He leaned forward in the chair. "There are 11 more ships out there, 11 more vessels like the one I am sitting in right now, the most advanced technology the universe has ever produced, sleeping in the dark corners of the galaxy, waiting for us, and I intend to go find every single one of them. So, if anyone back home wants to come help, you should probably start packing, because the galaxy just got a whole lot bigger, and it turns out we were always meant to be part of it." He closed the channel and sat back. On the bridge of the Aethras Vigil, the ancient sigil of the Vethari glowed steady and bright on the wall, an emblem that had not been seen by living eyes in 100 millennia, burning now with a light that was not just remembrance, but promise. And deep within the ship, in the place where intelligence and memory and something very close to a soul resided, Kalen spoke a final thought into the quiet. "The Vethari built us to find those who would not conquer with power, but earn trust through defiance and compassion and stubborn courage. They searched for a species that, given a weapon capable of annihilation, would choose mercy. And in 100,000 years of silence, only the humans answered. Waited, and the myth returned, not as a memory, but as a promise."